President Biden has indicated that increasing work requirements for SNAP benefits is on the table for debt ceiling talks. He said, quote, "I'm not going to accept any work requirements that are going to impact on medical health needs of people," but added that it's possible a deal could expand work rules for non-Medicaid programs, according to Politico. Now, Representative and Progressive Caucus Leader Pramila Jayapal responded, telling Politico, quote, "It was confusing because he said that he wasn't open to much more than what we had, which seemed to leave a little door open. But look, I have been clear that is a non-starter with us."
Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted yesterday, "Here's the deal. McCarthy has nowhere near the votes for a deal and therefore cannot negotiate the debt ceiling. You need 218 votes. GOP has maybe 150. They will need anywhere from 50 to 100 House Dems to pass anything. Dems have 213 votes for a clean bill, just need to pick up 5. So AOC is pointing to the fact that there are very close margins in the House, obviously. She's saying that they have 213 votes for a bill to raise the debt ceiling without there being any conditions on it. And given the financial implications globally, economically, if we were to default on our debt, what she's basically saying is that it seems to be more likely that Democrats would be able to pick up 5 Republicans to come over and vote for a clean bill than the Republican caucus, which is pretty divided on these issues. There have been some hardliners that are pushing for some pretty significant cuts to the deficit, cuts to the social safety net programs. And they're at different kind of levels of intensity on that issue. The likelihood that there's going to be a 218 consensus on that side seems to be relatively slim.
We have some clips of Joe Biden talking about this. Let's watch that.
And with all 4 leaders in the Congress, it was civil and respectful, and everyone came to the meeting, I think, in good faith. I'm confident that we'll get the agreement on the budget, that America will not default. And every leader in the room understands the consequences if we fail to pay our bills. And it would be catastrophic for the American economy and the American people if we didn't pay our bills. And I'm confident everyone in the room agreed with the speaker, from the speaker to the majority leader, to the majority leader in the House and the Senate, the majority leader in the Senate, the minority leader in the Senate, as well as the Democratic leader in the House, that we're going to come together because there's no alternative. To do the right thing for the country, we have to move on. And to be clear, this negotiation is about the outlines of what the budget will look like, not about whether or not we're going to, in fact, pay our debts. The leaders have all agreed we will not default.
So what's interesting about this is that, for all the conservatives, Republicans, claiming to care about reducing the deficit, balancing our budget, not spending more than we have, it's actually the Democratic proposal does significant deficit reduction by massive tax increases, and then also taking in more revenue, and then some select cuts, including to defense spending. Republicans, on the other hand, don't want to raise taxes, which I support, but then are not willing to make any cuts. Biden kind of forced them at the State of the Union to agree no cuts to the fastest growing programs, Social Security, Medicare, et cetera. They've said we're not going to touch that. They know that's politically unpopular. But then they also haven't really agreed to do defense spending cuts. So basically, they're not, and then what their sticking point has been this work requirement, which you can think that's a good policy. You can think people who are getting welfare should have to. You can think that requirement is proper, but it's not it's not a financial. In fact, I've seen arguments that those proposals, depending on how they're structured, can actually cost more money because the cost of verifying that people are actually doing the work requirements. You need more people to do the verifying, so you have to hire employees. Say you have to have checks, audits of that kind of stuff. That can actually cost money. So the Republican plan is not really a deficit reduction plan at all.
And so we hear Republicans making this statement repeatedly. Marjorie Taylor Greene did it in a recent interview, saying that we don't have, they characterize the American budget as a household budget, which in strict economic terms is wrong. But even accepting that, they say it's a household budget, and we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. Well, I think most people understand, having run a household, that you can't ignore the whole revenue column if you're trying to balance your budget, especially when we have In 2019, it was the first year that American billionaires paid a lower effective tax rate than working class people. We have repeatedly cut taxes for the rich. Donald Trump with his $1.7 trillion tax cut for the rich, which added dramatically to the deficit. Joe Biden has pledged not to raise taxes on anyone making less than $400,000 a year and has not violated that pledge. The tax proposals, that raising taxes on billionaires is what's been proposed here, something that, again, a lot of these populist Republicans have been resisting.
Well, a massive increase to the corporate tax rate.
Right.
That's been proposed.
Corporations.
Yes.
Correct. So while they are defending corporations and the very, very wealthy from having their tax rates raised, they are supporting things like having additional work requirements or work requirements implemented for things like Medicaid. So Medicaid, which is a health care program for poor people who can't afford health care, the idea that because you're sick and also need to be working, courts have said that this should not stand because it undermines the whole purpose of the program. The idea of adding additional work requirements to SNAP is something that even Biden now has said is on the table. The SNAP food program, obviously. Right. To qualify for SNAP for a family of three, to qualify for SNAP, you have to be at or below 130% of the poverty line. The poverty line is a family of three living on $1,920 a month. So 130% of that is a three-person family living on $2,495 a month. These are the people that are being targeted by these deficit hawks. And again, no talks about raising taxes on the wealthiest who have enormously grown their wealth over the course of the pandemic years.
People need to think through what work requirements actually are. So that means you have to have someone verifying that the people getting SNAP benefits are submitting resumes to job applications. Like, I understand why conceptually you want, people should just not rely on welfare forever if they're able-bodied and they should pursue employment.
And there are already work requirements for a lot of these programs.
The cost of verifying it is really probably more harmful than even if morally it should be the case that people on welfare should be seeking, should not be a permanent scenario, should be seeking employment. So I don't, and again, that does nothing for deficit reduction.
Yeah.
If you're going to be serious about deficit reduction, you have to either raise more revenue in the form of taxes, which I don't think we should do because we disagree on this. I don't want to make corporations pay more. I don't think that will create a healthier economic climate if we drive corporations overseas to avoid the tax rate here. What I favor instead is you do have to do massive cuts, and you can't say we're not going to do cuts to entitlements because they're unpopular, and we're also not going to do cuts to defense because we're afraid of spending, however much money we spent on defense 3 years ago. It's beyond the pale. We can't possibly have 2019's defense budget. We'll be defenseless. We'll be overrun. We'll be attacked by Russia, China, etc. It's not compelling or convincing at all to me.
Yeah, last year Congress passed the largest defense budget ever, $800 billion. They passed a budget that was, I believe, $37 billion more than what Biden even asked for. So again, we're talking about a world where they can just casually throw $37 billion on the pile for war, where we can continue to cut taxes for the wealthiest people in this country so that they are paying a lower effective tax rate than working class people. But the money that they were trying to claw back is from people who are already in the bottom tier of the American economy, people who are already making near the poverty rate to even be eligible for these programs to begin with, talking about increasing work requirements that are already there. So one of the suggestions was to raise, I think, the SNAP work requirement eligibility from 50 to 55 or 56. So basically, if you're over a certain age, the work requirement lapses and they want to raise that age. Mm-hmm. So increasingly, elderly people being asked to work and able to get a program that enables them to feed themselves, which maybe should be on the table in a world where you would looked at some other problems going on, like an out-of-control military budget, like out-of-control corporate greed, like low effective tax rates for the wealthiest people in America. At a certain point, somebody's going to have to put together why it is that the millionaires and billionaires that populate Congress seem to have an enormous appetite for cutting programs and squeezing the poor, and never any appetite for programs that would happen to affect their personal wealth.
Yes, and no one should ever believe politicians who say, Republicans run on this all the time. We're going to control spending. It was a drunken binge kind of thing, and the tab has come due, and we're going to pay it, and we're going to rein it in. and then, okay, but we're not touching that, we're not touching that, we're not touching that, we're not touching that. There's not enough, I wish there was enough foreign aid that we could just stop giving, and then that would cover our deficit, but it's such a small portion, and it should not be done. I'm totally against the foreign aid, but a lot of people naively think that would solve our problems. It's not enough money. There's not enough money. We spend a lot of money. You got to make serious cuts, or the Democrats argue for raising taxes. So those are the options.
And one other thing that's worth noting also is that there are firms that contract with the government to administer these programs that lobby aggressively for things like work requirements. A lot of these industries, this industry didn't even exist before the welfare reform the Democrats implemented in the 1990s. It's created an entire industry of people who take government money to basically say they're putting people in job placement programs, which in fact they have a very low success rates compared to people just trying to find their own jobs, and they get paid for doing that regardless of whether or not, if a person on the program gets a job, they're being paid for that regardless if they actually were the person that connected them with a real job. So there's a whole corrupt scheme going on, and these people are very much invested in lobbying for more work requirements always. They're thrilled about the prospect that Joe Biden, who's holding himself out as the labor president, the president for working people, is actually entertaining increasing and implementing new programs, work requirement programs for the poor at the same time that he's letting corporate elites run ramshot over our country. So something to keep an eye on as well. We'll have a Rising for you right after this.